What if everything you believed about the afterlife was wrong? Rabbi Elazar, a 74-year-old spiritual leader with over half a century of devoted service, thought he knew the truth about salvation and the Messiah. But a catastrophic car crash on Christmas Day 2023 shattered more than just his earthly body. In a realm of darkness and anguish, Elazar encountered familiar faces writhing in torment, respected rabbis and teachers he had revered throughout his life. Their cries echoed a shocking revelation. We were wrong. God's Messiah came, but we rejected him. As Elazar's world crumbled around him, a radiant figure appeared, offering a truth that would challenge everything he had ever known. Rabbi Elazar's life was a testament to unwavering faith and devotion. At 74 years old, he had spent over half a century as a spiritual leader, his roots deeply embedded in a rich Jewish heritage. Born into a Levite lineage, Elazar's connection to his faith was not just a matter of choice, but a birthright that shaped his very identity. From a young age, Elazar was immersed in the teachings of Torah and Talmud. His family's lineage as Levites, the tribe historically responsible for the care of the temple in Jerusalem, instilled in him a profound sense of duty and spiritual responsibility. This ancestral calling seemed to fuel his passion for understanding and interpreting the sacred texts, leading him to become one of the most respected rabbis in his community. Elazar's convictions about the Messiah were as unshakable as the ancient stones of Jerusalem. He firmly believed in the traditional Jewish interpretation that the Messiah was yet to come, a future king who would usher in an era of peace and restore Israel to its former glory. This belief was not just an academic exercise for Elazar. It was the cornerstone of his faith, influencing every aspect of his life and teachings. His years in Israel only served to deepen this conviction. Walking the streets of Jerusalem, studying at renowned yeshivas, and engaging in heated debates with fellow scholars, Elazar felt a visceral connection to the land and its spiritual heritage. The Western Wall, the winding alleys of the Old City, the view from the Mount of Olives, each of these places seemed to whisper ancient prophecies, reinforcing his belief in the coming Messiah. Elazar's dedication to living according to God's laws was legendary among his followers. He meticulously observed every mitzvah, large and small, from the intricate laws of kashrut to the precise timings of daily prayers. His students often marveled at his ability to find spiritual significance in even the most mundane activities, turning every moment into an opportunity for divine connection. As the years passed, Elazar's reputation as a wise and compassionate leader grew. People sought his counsel on matters both spiritual and practical, trusting in his deep understanding of Jewish law and his ability to apply ancient wisdom to modern dilemmas. His sermons were eagerly anticipated, filled with insights that seemed to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. Yet for all his wisdom and devotion, Elazar could never have anticipated the life-altering event that awaited him. December 25th, 2023 began as an ordinary day. He rose early, said his morning prayers, and prepared for a day of study and counsel. The fact that it was Christmas held no particular significance for him. It was simply another day in the Jewish calendar, a time for reflection and gratitude. As Elazar left his home that evening, heading to a community event, there was no hint of the profound change that was about to occur. The crisp winter air, the familiar streets of his neighborhood, the weight of the Torah commentary in his bag, everything felt normal, comfortably predictable. He had no way of knowing that in a matter of hours, everything he believed, everything he had devoted his life to, would be called into question. The moment that would challenge everything Rabbi Elazar held dear was approaching, silent and unseen. As he drove through the darkening streets, his mind on the lecture he was to deliver, He was blissfully unaware that his understanding of life, death, and the very nature of salvation was about to be shattered. The foundations of his faith, built over 7 decades of devoted study and practice, were about to face their greatest test. Have you ever wondered what lies beyond the veil of death? For Rabbi Elazar, a man of unwavering faith, that question was about to be answered in the most unexpected and terrifying way. As his car sped through the darkness, he was moments away from a journey that would take him far beyond the realms of earthly understanding. The cold winter night enveloped Rabbi Elazar's vehicle as he navigated the treacherous, icy roads. His mind, still occupied with thoughts of the lecture he had just delivered, failed to register the danger that lay ahead. The streetlights cast an eerie glow on the slick pavement, creating a deceptive illusion of safety. Suddenly, the world around him erupted into chaos. The car in front slammed on its brakes, its taillights flaring like angry red eyes in the darkness. Rabbi Elazar's reflexes kicked in, but on the icy surface, they were no match for the laws of physics. His vehicle began to spin, the world outside becoming a dizzying blur of lights and shadows. In that moment of terror, time seemed to slow down. Rabbi Elazar could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears like a drum. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension, but it was futile. The car careened out of control, heading towards an inevitable collision. Then it happened. The impact was, as Rabbi Elazar would later describe, sudden impact, a deafening silence, and then everything went dark. The sound of crunching metal and shattering glass filled the air for a split second before an eerie silence descended. In that instant, Rabbi Elazar's consciousness slipped away from the physical world, plunging him into an unfamiliar realm. When awareness returned, it was unlike anything Rabbi Elazar had ever experienced. His senses were overwhelmed by an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to press in on him from all sides. The darkness was absolute, a void so complete that it felt tangible. The air was oppressive and heavy, he would later recount, and an overwhelming darkness surrounded me, a darkness so profound it felt tangible, woven with despair and regret. Confusion reigned in Rabbi Elazar's mind as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. His body felt strangely disconnected, as if he were floating in a sea of nothingness. The familiar anchors of physical sensation were gone, replaced by a disconcerting weightlessness. My body felt disconnected from reality, and I was consumed by confusion, he would later recall, his words echoing the experiences of many who have had near-death experiences. As Rabbi Elazar's consciousness adjusted to this new reality, he became aware of sounds that chilled him to his very core. Heartbreaking cries echoed through the darkness, interspersed with whispers full of anger and sorrow. These were not the sounds of the living, but the anguished voices of souls in torment. With growing horror, Rabbi Elazar began to realize that this was no ordinary dream or hallucination. The oppressive atmosphere, the tangible darkness, the sounds of suffering, all pointed to a terrifying conclusion. He had entered a realm beyond the physical, a place that seemed to embody the very essence of despair and regret. As this realization dawned on him, Rabbi Elazar felt a profound shift in his perception. The screams of hell faded and the darkness evaporated, only to be replaced by a new and equally terrifying landscape. He was about to witness horrors that would challenge everything he had ever believed about the afterlife and his own faith. Little did Rabbi Elazar know that this was merely the beginning of a journey that would shake the very foundations of his spiritual understanding. As he stood on the precipice of this hellish realm, he was unaware of the profound revelations and life-altering encounters that awaited him in the depths of this unexpected afterlife. The precipice of hell is often imagined as a fiery chasm, but what if the true horror lies in recognizing the faces trapped within? Rabbi Elazar was about to confront a reality far more disturbing than he could have ever conceived. As Rabbi Elazar's consciousness plummeted deeper into the abyss, the darkness began to take shape around him. The void was no longer empty, but filled with unspeakable horrors. Grotesque figures emerged from the shadows, their forms twisted and contorted in ways that defied natural law. The air itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, thick with the stench of despair and decay. The walls of this hellish realm were not mere stone or earth, but living, breathing flesh. They pulsated rhythmically, as if driven by some unholy heartbeat. Faces trapped within these walls of flesh screamed silently, their expressions frozen in eternal anguish. Rabbi Elazar recoiled in horror, his mind struggling to comprehend the nightmarish landscape unfolding before him. As he descended further, fiery valleys opened up beneath his feet, their flames casting an eerie, flickering light across the landscape. The heat was intense, yet it brought no warmth, only a bone-deep chill that seemed to penetrate his very soul. Rabbi Elazar felt a weight pressing down on him, as if the very air was trying to crush his spirit. Shadowy figures darted at the edges of his vision, their forms constantly shifting and changing. Some appeared almost human, while others were monstrous amalgamations of creatures that should not exist. Their movements were erratic and purposeless, as if they were trapped in an endless cycle of torment. As Rabbi Elazar's eyes adjusted to the hellish glow, he began to make out more distinct forms among the writhing masses. To his shock and dismay, he recognized faces of people he knew, respected, and even revered. There, trapped in the midst of this infernal realm, were rabbis and teachers he had looked up to throughout his life. One face in particular stood out, a rabbi who had been a mentor to Elazar, a man whose wisdom and piety he had always admired. But now that once serene face was contorted with regret and anguish. As Elazar drew closer, he heard the rabbi's voice, rasping and filled with sorrow. "We were wrong," the voice croaked, barely audible above the cacophony of suffering souls. "God's Messiah came, but we rejected him. We didn't see, we were blind." The words hit Rabbi Elazar like a physical blow. He staggered back, his mind reeling from the implications. How could this be? These were men of great faith and learning, pillars of the Jewish community. If they were here, suffering in this place of torment, what did that mean for everything Elazar had believed? As the full weight of this revelation crashed down upon him, Rabbi Elazar felt his world crumbling around him. Everything he had devoted his life to, every certainty he had clung to, was now cast into doubt. The foundations of his faith, once as solid as bedrock, now felt as insubstantial as sand. In that moment of profound spiritual crisis, Rabbi Elazar realized that his journey was far from over. The horrors he had witnessed and the truths he had learned were only the beginning. As he stood there, surrounded by the anguished souls of those he once revered, he knew that his understanding of faith, salvation, and the very nature of God's plan was about to be challenged in ways he could never have imagined. In the depths of that infernal realm, Rabbi Elazar found himself face to face with the unthinkable. The familiar visages of his former mentors, once beacons of wisdom and righteousness, were now twisted with anguish and regret. Their expressions bore the weight of eternal torment, a sight that shook Rabbi Elazar to his very core. As he approached these trapped souls, Rabbi Elazar's mind reeled with questions. How could these pillars of Jewish faith, these revered teachers, be confined to such a place of suffering? The disconnect between their earthly reputations and their current state was almost too much to bear. Yet, he felt a desperate need to understand, to make sense of this impossible scenario. The air around him seemed to thicken with sorrow as he drew closer. The voices of the damned, once proud and authoritative, now rasped with a haunting fragility. Each word seemed to cost them immense effort, as if speaking itself was a form of torture. Rabbi Elazar strained to hear their words, both dreading and needing to know the truth they held. "We were blind," one voice croaked, barely audible above the ambient wails of suffering. "We rejected him, the true Messiah." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications that threatened to unravel millennia of Jewish theology. Rabbi Elazar felt his breath catch in his throat, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Another voice joined in, filled with a regret so palpable it seemed to create ripples in the oppressive atmosphere. "We clung to our traditions, our interpretations. We couldn't see beyond our own understanding." The confession was like a dagger to Rabbi Elazar's heart, each word chipping away at the foundations of his lifelong beliefs. As more voices added their laments to the chorus of regret, a pattern began to emerge. These once revered rabbis spoke of a fundamental misunderstanding, a catastrophic error in judgment that had led them to this place of torment. They spoke of prophecies misinterpreted, signs overlooked, and a stubborn refusal to consider alternative viewpoints. Rabbi Elazar listened, his mind racing to connect the dots. The pieces of a cosmic puzzle were falling into place, revealing a picture that both terrified and fascinated him. He felt as if he was standing on the precipice of a profound revelation, one that would forever alter his understanding of faith, salvation, and the very nature of God's plan. Then, with a clarity that cut through the chaos of hell, came the words that would shatter Rabbi Elazar's world. Jesus was the Messiah, and we rejected him. The statement, simple yet earth-shattering, echoed through the fiery chasms. It was a truth so unexpected, so contrary to everything Rabbi Elazar had believed and taught, that it seemed to physically knock the breath from his lungs. In that moment, Rabbi Elazar felt the foundations of his faith crumble beneath him. The certainties he had clung to for decades dissolved like smoke. Everything he had devoted his life to, every sermon he had preached, every piece of advice he had given, was now cast into doubt. The implications were staggering, reaching far beyond his own life to touch the very heart of Jewish identity and belief. As he stood there, surrounded by the anguished souls of those he once revered, Rabbi Elazar realized that his journey through this hellish realm was far from over. The truths he had uncovered here were only the beginning. He sensed that he was on the cusp of an even greater revelation, one that would challenge not just his understanding of the Messiah, but his very conception of salvation and God's love. Just when Rabbi Elazar thought he had confronted the most shocking truth of his existence, a phenomenon occurred that defied the laws of this hellish domain. A tiny point of light emerged in the distance, growing rapidly. What could this unprecedented radiance mean in a place defined by eternal darkness? The beam of light pierced through the oppressive gloom, initially appearing as a mere pinprick in the vast expanse of darkness. As it grew, it began to flood the hellish landscape with an otherworldly radiance. The suffocating shadows that had enveloped Rabbi Elazar started to recede, replaced by a warmth that seemed to penetrate his very being. The contrast between this pure light and the despair-ridden environment was stark and jarring. Rabbi Elazar found himself drawn to the growing brilliance, yet he struggled to focus on its source. The light was overwhelming in its purity, unlike anything he had ever experienced. It brought with it a profound sense of serenity that seemed impossible in this realm of torment. As the radiance intensified, Rabbi Elazar shielded his eyes, squinting against the brilliance. Slowly, a figure began to emerge from the heart of the light. It was a transcendent being, radiating an aura of power and tenderness that stirred something deep within the rabbi's soul. Every step the figure took seemed to push back the darkness further, transforming the hellish landscape into a realm of light. Rabbi Elazar felt an immediate and overwhelming sense of being fully seen and understood by this luminous presence. It was as if the figure knew every detail of his life, his fears, his regrets, his moments of doubt and triumph. This realization brought tears to his eyes, a mixture of awe and vulnerability washing over him. The figure drew closer, and Rabbi Elazar found himself trembling with a combination of fear and anticipation. Who was this being that could bring such light to the depths of hell? As he gazed upon the radiant form, he began to notice familiar features, eyes filled with boundless compassion, hands bearing marks of sacrifice, a face that seemed to embody both strength and gentleness. With each passing moment, a growing realization dawned on Rabbi Elazar. The pieces began to fall into place, the confessions of the trapped rabbis, the misunderstood prophecies, the rejected Messiah. His mind raced as he considered the implications of what he was witnessing. Then, in a moment of clarity that seemed to transcend time and space, Rabbi Elazar understood. This radiant being, this source of unimaginable light and love, was Jesus, the very one he had spent his entire life dismissing, the one whose claims he had refuted countless times in his teachings, stood before him in undeniable glory. The realization hit Rabbi Elazar with the force of a spiritual earthquake. Everything he had believed, everything he had taught, was now cast in a new light. He felt simultaneously humbled and elevated, broken and made whole. As he stood in the presence of the one he now recognized as the true Messiah, Rabbi Elazar knew that his life would never be the same. As the initial shock began to subside, Rabbi Elazar sensed that this encounter was far from over. The air around him seemed charged with anticipation, as if the very fabric of reality was holding its breath. He knew with a certainty that transcended rational thought that a life-changing conversation was about to unfold, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about faith, salvation, and the nature of God's love. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to have your entire life laid bare before you, every choice and consequence illuminated with perfect clarity? For Rabbi Elazar, this wasn't just imagination, it was about to become his reality. As Jesus stood before him, radiating divine authority, Rabbi Elazar felt the weight of his 74 years pressing down upon him. The air crackled with an otherworldly energy, and in that moment, time seemed to stand still. The rabbi's life began to flash before his eyes, not as a series of memories, but as a vivid tapestry of choices and consequences. Every sermon he had delivered, every interpretation of scripture he had offered, every piece of advice he had given, all of it was now laid out before him. But instead of the sense of pride and accomplishment he might have expected, Rabbi Elazar felt an overwhelming emptiness. The realization dawned on him that despite his decades of devotion, something fundamental had been missing from his faith. Jesus spoke, his voice resonating with unparalleled authority. "Elazar," he said, "you have spent your life seeking truth, yet you have been blind to the greatest truth of all." The words cut through the rabbi's defenses, challenging the very foundation of his beliefs. Every argument he had ever made against Jesus' messiahship now seemed hollow in the face of this divine presence. As Jesus continued to speak, Rabbi Elazar felt his cherished convictions begin to crumble. The Messiah he had awaited for so long stood before him, not as a conquering king, but as a loving savior. The cognitive dissonance was almost overwhelming. How could he reconcile this reality with everything he had believed and taught? Yet, even as doubt and confusion swirled within him, Rabbi Elazar couldn't deny the profound sense of love and acceptance emanating from Jesus. It was a love that seemed to see through all his flaws and failures, offering something he had never truly experienced before: unconditional grace. Jesus extended his hand, offering not just salvation, but a new purpose. "Elazar," he said, "I am offering you a chance to truly serve God's plan, to bring light to those who, like you, have been walking in darkness." The invitation hung in the air, pregnant with possibility and fraught with implications. Rabbi Elazar's mind raced. If he accepted this offer, what would it mean for his life's work? for his community, for his very identity. The struggle between his lifelong beliefs and the undeniable presence before him raged within his soul. He found himself teetering on the edge of a monumental decision, one that would redefine everything he thought he knew about faith and salvation. As he stood there, caught between two worlds, Rabbi Elazar felt a profound shift in his perception. The truth he had sought for so long was right before him, offering not just answers, but a relationship. In that moment, all his doubts and fears seemed to pale in comparison to the love and purpose being offered. With trembling hand and racing heart, Rabbi Elazar reached out and grasped Jesus' outstretched hand. The moment their hands touched, a wave of indescribable peace washed over him. It was as if scales had fallen from his eyes, and for the first time, he truly saw. As this transformative moment unfolded, Rabbi Elazar knew that his journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The rabbi who had entered this realm, clinging to his old beliefs, was gone. In his place stood a man transformed, ready to embrace a new chapter in his spiritual odyssey. Little did he know, the most challenging part of his journey, reconciling his new faith with his old life, was yet to come. The veil between worlds lifted, and Rabbi Elazar found himself thrust back into a reality that felt alien and incomplete. As the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room assaulted his senses, he grappled with a profound question. How does one live in a world of shadows after glimpsing the brilliance of divine truth? The stark white walls and sterile scent of disinfectant created a jarring contrast to the spiritual realm he had just experienced. Rabbi Elazar blinked, trying to reconcile the mundane hospital surroundings with the transcendent encounter that still resonated within his soul. The weight of his experience pressed against his consciousness, threatening to overwhelm him. As he lay there, a flood of memories washed over him. The hellish landscape, the anguished faces of his former mentors, and the radiant figure of Jesus. Each image burned into his mind with searing clarity. Rabbi Elazar struggled to make sense of it all, his thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and revelations. The implications of what he had witnessed were staggering. Everything he had believed about the Messiah, about salvation, about the very nature of faith itself, had been called into question. Rabbi Elazar found himself engaged in an intense internal dialogue, wrestling with the profound truths that had been revealed to him. How could I have been so blind, he wondered, his heart heavy with the realization of his own spiritual emptiness. The love and acceptance he had experienced in Jesus' presence stood in stark contrast to the rigid interpretations he had clung to for so long. It was as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes, revealing a depth of divine compassion he had never before imagined. As Rabbi Elazar lay in his hospital bed, he felt a growing sense of anticipation. He knew that this experience would change the course of his life, but the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. How would he reconcile his newfound faith with the community he had led for so many years? What would this mean for his role as a spiritual leader? The decision to revisit his old beliefs with an open mind didn't come easily. It meant challenging everything he had ever taught, everything he had built his life upon. Yet, the truth he had encountered was too powerful to ignore. Rabbi Elazar resolved to approach his faith with fresh eyes, to re-examine the scriptures and prophecies that had once seemed so clear-cut. As he made this internal commitment, Rabbi Elazar felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges. His community, his colleagues, even his own family might struggle to understand the profound transformation he had undergone. The path of a spiritual pioneer is often lonely and misunderstood. Yet, despite the uncertainties that lay ahead, Rabbi Elazar felt a deep sense of purpose stirring within him. The love he had experienced in that otherworldly encounter had awakened something in his soul, a desire to share this newfound truth with others who, like him, had been walking in spiritual darkness. As the reality of his situation settled in, Rabbi Elazar braced himself for the journey ahead. He knew that reconciling his new faith with his old life would be no easy task. The challenges that lay before him were daunting. Re-examining sacred texts, confronting long-held beliefs, and navigating the reactions of his community. But with each breath, he felt a growing determination to embrace this new chapter in his spiritual odyssey, no matter the cost. Rabbi Elazar's world had been turned upside down. As he lay in his hospital bed, the echoes of Jesus' words reverberated through his mind, clashing violently with a lifetime of Jewish teachings. The spiritual storm, raging within him, threatened to tear apart everything he had ever known and believed. The weight of his newfound truth pressed heavily upon him. How could he reconcile the Jesus he had encountered with the Messiah he had been taught to expect? The love and acceptance he had felt in that otherworldly realm seemed at odds with the rigid interpretations of Scripture he had clung to for decades. Rabbi Elazar found himself questioning not just his beliefs, but his entire life's purpose. As he grappled with these conflicting realities, a deep-seated fear began to take root in his heart. What would his community think if they knew of his experience? The prospect of being labeled a heretic, of becoming an outcast among the very people he had led for so long, filled him with dread. He had spent his entire life building respect and authority within the Jewish community. Could he risk throwing it all away for this new understanding? Yet even as fear threatened to overwhelm him, Rabbi Elazar couldn't shake the profound sense of truth he had encountered. The spiritual turmoil he was experiencing felt like a refining fire, burning away the chaff of misunderstanding and revealing a purer, more authentic faith. But the path forward was far from clear. He wrestled with questions that seemed to have no easy answers. How could he remain true to his Jewish heritage while embracing Jesus as the Messiah? Was it possible to bridge the gap between these two seemingly irreconcilable truths? The struggle left him feeling adrift, caught between two worlds and belonging fully to neither. As days passed in the hospital, Rabbi Elazar's mind raced with possibilities and doubts. He replayed his encounter with Jesus over and over, each time uncovering new layers of meaning and significance. The love he had experienced in that moment was unlike anything he had known before. A love that saw through all his imperfections and offered unconditional acceptance. This realization began to spark a change within him. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Rabbi Elazar felt a shift in his perspective. The fear and uncertainty that had gripped him began to give way to a sense of purpose and determination. He realized that he couldn't simply ignore or dismiss what he had experienced. The truth he had encountered was too powerful, too life-altering to be pushed aside. In a moment of clarity, Rabbi Elazar made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He resolved to study Jesus' identity and teachings with an open mind and heart. This wasn't a rejection of his Jewish faith, but rather an expansion of it. He would approach this new chapter in his spiritual journey with the same fervor and dedication he had always applied to his study of Torah and Talmud. As he made this internal commitment, Rabbi Elazar felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges and obstacles, yet for the first time since his near-death experience, he felt a sense of direction and purpose. With trembling hands, Rabbi Elazar reached for his phone. He knew his first step would be to obtain a copy of the New Testament, a book he had previously considered taboo. As he placed the order, He felt as if he was crossing a threshold into uncharted spiritual territory. Little did he know, this simple act would be the beginning of a profound journey that would challenge, inspire, and ultimately transform not just his own life, but the lives of countless others. As Rabbi Elazar hesitantly picked up the copy of the New Testament, he felt a strange mix of anticipation and trepidation. The book, once considered taboo, now lay before him like a key to an undiscovered realm. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the cover, the weight of a lifetime's teachings pressing against this moment of spiritual exploration. The first pages revealed a surprise that shook Rabbi Elazar to his core. There, laid out in meticulous detail, was Jesus' genealogy tracing back to King David. This connection, so fundamental to the Jewish expectation of the Messiah, had been hidden from him in plain sight. The rabbi's mind reeled as he considered the implications. Could it be that Jesus truly fulfilled this crucial prophecy? With growing fascination, Rabbi Elazar delved deeper into the text. He found himself re-examining messianic prophecies he had studied his entire life, now viewing them through a new lens. Passages that had once seemed clear in their interpretation now took on new depths of meaning. The rabbi's analytical mind, honed by years of Talmudic study, began to piece together a picture that both thrilled and terrified him. As he read Jesus' teachings, Rabbi Elazar was struck by their profound resonance with familiar Torah passages. The Sermon on the Mount echoed the wisdom of the Psalms and Proverbs. Jesus' parables carried the same moral weight as the stories of the prophets. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing connections that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. With each turn of the page, Rabbi Elazar felt a growing sense of anticipation. He was on the cusp of a profound realization, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about salvation and God's plan. The pieces of a cosmic puzzle were falling into place, revealing a picture of divine love that was both familiar and radically new. Then, in a moment of clarity that seemed to transcend time and space, Rabbi Elazar understood. Salvation was not something to be earned through rigid adherence to the law or personal merit. It was a gift, freely given by a God whose love surpassed human understanding. This realization hit him with the force of a spiritual earthquake, shaking the very foundations of his faith. As the full implications of this new understanding washed over him, Rabbi Elazar felt a mixture of liberation and profound humility. Everything he had strived for, every mitzvah he had meticulously observed, paled in comparison to the grace he now recognized. It was a complete paradigm shift, one that would reshape not just his personal faith, but his entire approach to spiritual leadership. Rabbi Elazar closed the New Testament, his mind swirling with new insights and questions. He knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge him intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential conflict and misunderstanding. Yet, for the first time in his life, Rabbi Elazar felt he was truly on the cusp of understanding God's grand design. As he sat in quiet contemplation, Rabbi Elazar began to consider the far-reaching implications of his newfound understanding. How would this transform his role as a spiritual leader? What challenges would he face in sharing these revelations with his community? The rabbi knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he felt a growing sense of purpose and determination. He had been given a precious gift of insight, and now it was his responsibility to share it with others, bridging the gap between two faiths that had long stood apart. Rabbi Elazar's journey of spiritual transformation was far from over. As he grappled with his newfound faith, he faced the monumental task of reshaping his core identity. How could he reconcile his deep-rooted Jewish heritage with his acceptance of Jesus as the Messiah? This question plagued his every waking moment, challenging the very foundations of his being. The rabbi found himself walking a tightrope between two worlds. On one side lay the rich tapestry of Jewish tradition, the comfort of familiar rituals, and the community that had been his lifelong support. On the other, the radiant truth he had encountered in his near-death experience, a truth that promised a deeper connection with the divine. Balancing these seemingly opposing forces became Rabbi Elazar's daily struggle. As days turned into weeks, Rabbi Elazar immersed himself in study and contemplation. He pored over ancient texts with fresh eyes, finding new layers of meaning in passages he had recited countless times before. The prophecies of Isaiah and the Psalms of David took on a new significance, revealing connections to Jesus that he had never before recognized. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Rabbi Elazar began to feel a shift within himself. The love and acceptance he had experienced in his encounter with Jesus began to permeate his understanding of God. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a depth of divine compassion that transcended his previous conceptions. This growing awareness of God's unconditional love became the bedrock of his evolving faith. With this new understanding came a sense of purpose that both excited and terrified Rabbi Elazar. He began to see himself as a potential bridge between two faiths that had long stood apart. Could he be the one to help his Jewish brothers and sisters recognize the fulfillment of their long-awaited messianic prophecies? The weight of this responsibility was immense, but so too was the potential for healing and reconciliation. As Rabbi Elazar continued to navigate this spiritual transformation, he found himself drawn to the teachings of Messianic Judaism. This movement, which sought to integrate Jewish customs and practices with belief in Jesus as the Messiah, offered a path forward that honored both his heritage and his new faith. It was a delicate balance, but one that felt increasingly right as he explored it further. The rabbi's journey was not without its challenges. Doubts would sometimes creep in, tempting him to return to the safety of his old beliefs. There were nights when he lay awake, wrestling with questions that seemed to have no clear answers. Yet even in these moments of uncertainty, Rabbi Elazar felt a deep-seated peace that he had never known before. As weeks turned into months, Rabbi Elazar's transformation became increasingly evident to those around him. His sermons, once focused solely on traditional Jewish interpretations, now carried hints of a broader spiritual understanding. He spoke of God's love with a newfound passion that both intrigued and unsettled his congregation. Then came the moment that would define Rabbi Elazar's new path. Standing before his congregation, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and conviction, he made a decision that would alter the course of his ministry forever. With a voice that trembled slightly but grew stronger with each word, Rabbi Elazar shared his experience and his newfound belief in Jesus as the Messiah. The reaction was immediate and varied. Some listeners sat in stunned silence, while others whispered furiously among themselves. A few stood up and walked out, their faces a mix of confusion and anger. But there were also those whose eyes lit up with recognition, as if a missing piece of their own spiritual puzzle had suddenly fallen into place. As Rabbi Elazar finished speaking, he knew that this was only the beginning. His commitment to sharing Jesus' message of salvation would face numerous challenges in the days and weeks to come. But as he looked out at the faces before him, he felt a surge of purpose. He had taken the first step on a new journey, one that would impact not only his own life, but the lives of countless others seeking a deeper connection with God. Rabbi Elazar's transformation from a traditional Jewish leader to a witness of God's love through Jesus was not without its challenges. As he began to share his near-death experience and newfound faith, he encountered a mix of skepticism, curiosity, and outright rejection from his community. Some members of his congregation, deeply rooted in their traditional beliefs, found it difficult to accept his radical shift in perspective. The rabbi's efforts to explain Jesus' fulfillment of Jewish prophecies were met with varying degrees of resistance. He spent countless hours poring over ancient texts, drawing connections between the Old Testament prophecies and the life of Jesus. In his sermons, he would carefully weave together passages from Isaiah, Jeremiah, and the Psalms, illuminating how Jesus' life and teachings aligned with the long-awaited Messiah. One particularly moving moment came when Rabbi Elazar shared his insights on Isaiah 53, a passage that had long puzzled him. As he explained how this suffering servant could be understood as a prophecy about Jesus, he saw a spark of recognition in the eyes of some of his listeners. For others, however, this interpretation was a step too far, challenging centuries of traditional Jewish thought. Despite the challenges, Rabbi Elazar's testimony began to impact lives in unexpected ways. Sarah, a longtime member of the synagogue, approached him after a particularly powerful sermon. With tears in her eyes, she confessed that she had always felt a disconnect between her faith and her daily life. Rabbi Elazar's new perspective on God's love and grace had awakened something within her, bridging that gap and bringing her faith to life in a way she had never experienced before. Another member, David, a young man struggling with his Jewish identity, found solace in Rabbi Elazar's journey. The rabbi's ability to maintain his Jewish heritage while embracing Jesus as the Messiah offered David a path he had never considered possible. It gave him hope that he could reconcile his cultural identity with a broader spiritual understanding. As word of Rabbi Elazar's transformation spread beyond his immediate community, it began to spark wider conversations within Jewish circles. Some rabbis dismissed his experience outright, while others were intrigued enough to engage in thoughtful dialogue. These discussions, though often heated, opened up new avenues for interfaith understanding and exploration. The implications of Rabbi Elazar's message extended far beyond his local community. His story challenged traditional Jewish beliefs about the Messiah in a way that was both deeply personal and grounded in Scripture. It forced many to reconsider long-held assumptions and to examine their faith with fresh eyes. As Rabbi Elazar continued his journey, he found himself at the forefront of a growing movement of Messianic Jews. This community, which sought to reconcile Jewish traditions with belief in Jesus as the Messiah, offered a unique perspective on faith and identity. It was estimated that over 300,000 Messianic Jews worldwide were now part of this movement, a number that had been steadily increasing over the past few decades. Yet the path was not easy. Rabbi Elazar and others like him faced legal and social challenges, particularly in Israel. They often encountered opposition from both secular and religious Jewish communities struggling to gain recognition as a legitimate religious group. Many faced social ostracism from family and friends who could not accept their beliefs. Despite these obstacles, Rabbi Elazar remained steadfast in his mission. He saw his role as a bridge builder, helping others navigate the complex terrain between Jewish heritage and faith in Jesus. As he looked towards the future, he knew that his journey was far from over. The rabbi's story had become a testament to the power of personal experience in shaping faith and understanding, inviting others to consider their own beliefs and remain open to unexpected revelations. Rabbi Elazar's journey from skeptic to believer is a testament to the transformative power of personal experience. His near-death encounter shattered long-held beliefs and opened his eyes to a truth he had never imagined possible. The rabbi's story challenges us to consider our own spiritual convictions and remain open to unexpected revelations. As we reflect on Rabbi Elazar's transformation, we are reminded that faith is not static but dynamic, capable of evolving and deepening through profound experiences. His journey from a traditional Jewish leader to a witness of God's love through Jesus illustrates the potential for spiritual growth and understanding that lies within each of us. Rabbi Elazar's experience invites us to examine our own beliefs with fresh eyes. How might our understanding of the divine change if we allowed ourselves to be open to new perspectives? What revelations might await us if we step outside the boundaries of our familiar spiritual territories? The power of personal experience in shaping faith cannot be understated. For Rabbi Elazar, it was a near-death encounter that revolutionized his understanding of God's plan. For others, it might be a moment of profound connection in nature, an inexplicable coincidence, or a dream that feels more real than waking life. These experiences have the potential to bridge the gap between our everyday realities and the mysteries of the spiritual realm. As we conclude Rabbi Elazar's story, we are left with a sense of wonder at the vastness of the divine plan and the potential for transformation that exists within each of us. His journey reminds us that the pursuit of spiritual truth is a lifelong endeavor, one that requires courage, openness, and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions.